The guest room smelled faintly of detergent and something sharper, like the lemon polish Cassia insisted the cleaners use on the hardwood floors. I had tried to soften it with my lavender sachets, tucking them into the corners of drawers and beneath the pillowcases. But the scent never held. It was the kind of room that looked perfect in photos not one made for living. I ran my hand along the edge of the dresser, tracing the seam where the drawer met the frame. Inside lay the few things I had carried with me from my old house in San Antonio Jorge's cufflinks, a rosary with a missing bead, and my sachets. I pulled the top drawer open, meaning only to refill the sachet with new lavender. Instead, a crumpled envelope slid from the back, wedged between the lining and the wood. My breath caught as I tugged it free. The paper was yellowed, the edges curled as if it had been folded and refolded too many times. When I smoothed it across my lap, my heart stumbled. It was a photocopy of a property deed, the name Eloan Morales, printed neatly alongside Jorge Morales, and in smaller letters, Cassia Morales Winthrop. The date stamped across the top was 22 years ago, the year Cassia and Thorne bought their first house before they tore it down to build this mansion. I blinked, reading the legal phrases that felt like a foreign language. But the meaning was clear enough. Part of this land had once been, and perhaps still was, mine. The walls of the mansion seemed to shift around me, gleaming white marble suddenly cold against the back of my neck. For months, I had felt like an intruder in this place, shuffling carefully, keeping my voice low, apologizing for the clink of dishes in the sink. Yet here, hidden in my drawer, was proof that Jorge and I had been more than guests. We had been the foundation. Mother Cassia's voice floated down the hall, brisk and clipped the way she spoke when she was on a deadline. "Are you ready? Thorne wants us all at dinner together tonight. He's bringing some investors." I slid the envelope beneath the sachets and closed the drawer with careful fingers. My pulse was still racing when I opened the door. Cassia stood at the end of the hallway, hair swept into a glossy bun, her silk blouse the color of champagne. At 43, she looked every inch the executive she had worked so hard to become. Her eyes flicked past me, scanning the guest room as if searching for something out of place. "I'll be ready," I said. My voice came steadier than I felt. Cassia gave a thin smile. "Good. Please wear the blue dress. It photographs best." Thorne might ask the photographer to take a family shot for the website. Family shot. I nodded, though I knew she meant herself, Thorne, and their daughter, not me. My role would be to smile from the background, proof of tradition, but not truly part of the picture. When she left, I closed the door and leaned against it. My fingers itched to pull the deed out again, to make sure I had read it right. Jorge had never told me he kept my name on the property. Maybe he had wanted me to feel secure, even if Cassia and Thorne acted otherwise. I thought of Thorne then, of the way his voice boomed across the kitchen whenever he spoke of his ventures, how he bragged about investors lined up in New York. Yet sometimes late at night, I caught the strain in his jaw, the way he rubbed his temples when he thought no one was looking. The confidence felt rehearsed, the wealth always displayed, but never settled. I pressed my palm against the dresser, steadying myself. Gratitude warred with unease. I was thankful for a roof, for meals, for the nearness of family. But the copy of that deed whispered something different. I had not been given shelter out of charity. I had helped build it. As I smoothed the bedspread, I heard Cassia calling for the driver to be ready in 20 minutes. I straightened my shoulders, touched the lavender sachet for luck, and told myself I would sit through dinner with grace. But as I stepped into the hallway, I carried a secret that pulsed like a heartbeat in my pocket, the knowledge that this mansion was not wholly theirs, and perhaps never had been. By evening, the house had transformed. The chandeliers glowed with a sterile brilliance refracting off walls of glass that stretched from floor to ceiling. Polished chrome fixtures gleamed like armor, and every surface smelled faintly of lemon oil and something metallic. The space looked less like a home than a showroom. Cassia thrived in this setting. She moved through the rooms with a champagne flute in hand, her laugh clipped and bright drawing eyes as though she had been born for spotlights. Thorn stood beside her, booming in his confident voice, spinning stories about investments and market trends, his cufflinks catching the light. Their guests leaned in, nodding as if every word were gospel. I hovered near the kitchen. The caterers Cassia had hired had been instructed to keep to the back, so I stepped into their place, ferrying small trays of hors d'oeuvres into the living room. It wasn't expected of me, not really, but standing idle felt worse than being overlooked. At least with a tray in my hands, I had a reason to be invisible. "Try one of the crab cakes," I murmured, offering the platter to a pair of women in sequined dresses. They smiled politely, barely glancing at me, before turning back to their conversation about Aspen vacations. From across the room, I caught snippets of talk. Cassia's mother lives with them. Right, eccentric, but harmless. Another voice. Half a laugh. Every family has one. The words slid over me sharp in their carelessness. They didn't know I could hear, or perhaps they didn't care. I remembered another house years ago where laughter had spilled through crooked windows and the smell of cornbread lingered in every corner. Our old farmhouse had been small, drafty in winter, but warm with life. Jorge used to sit at the table with flour on his hands, pretending to help me roll tamales, though he mostly ate the filling when he thought I wasn't looking. Friends dropped by unannounced, and nobody worried whether the curtains matched the carpet. That house had been alive. This mansion, with its spotless marble and spotless conversations, felt as though it might crack if anyone raised their voice too high. I passed another tray and caught sight of myself reflected in the glass wall. My hair, silver at the edges, was pulled back too tightly. My dress, though chosen carefully, seemed plain among sequins and jewels. The reflection looked faint, like a shadow that had forgotten how to anchor itself. Thorn caught my eye for a moment. His smile wavered, though only slightly, before he turned back to his circle of investors. He raised his glass voice, swelling again, promising returns that seemed larger than life. I wondered if any of it was true, or if it was just another showpiece like the art on the walls, impressive from afar, hollow when touched. When I slipped back into the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator and the clatter of pans comforted me more than the music and chatter outside. The caterers worked quickly, their voices low but kind. One of them offered me a glass of water, and I accepted it gratefully. For a few moments, I let myself breathe. Then Cassia appeared in the doorway, her smile fixed tight. "Mother, please don't stay in here all night. At least stand where people can see you. It looks odd otherwise." I nodded, swallowing the water in a rush. Obedient, I carried another tray back into the glow of glass and laughter. My reflection caught me again this time, in the curve of a chrome pillar. A woman holding food no one noticed in a house where her presence was a detail rather than a truth. How long, I wondered. Can someone live invisible in the middle of their own family's home? The morning after the party, the house felt too quiet, as though all the laughter and boasting had been vacuumed out with the empty champagne bottles. I moved carefully through the kitchen, measuring coffee grounds into the machine the way I had for decades. The smell rose slowly, rich, familiar, comforting. I thought of Jorge, who used to call it the scent of morning, and how he'd tease me for making it too strong. I set 2 mugs on the counter, one for myself and one for Leora. At 13, she was already taller than I had been at that age, with Cassia's almond eyes, but Jorge's crooked grin. I knew she'd be up soon for school, and I hoped a warm drink might coax a smile, a moment of closeness, before the day rushed her away. While the coffee brewed, I gathered slices of sourdough ready to toast them, just as I used to when Leora was little, and liked to sit at my kitchen table swinging her legs and dipping bread into honey. I smiled at the memory, though the ache in my chest reminded me how long it had been since she had looked at me that way. The vibration of a phone carried down the hallway. I stepped out of the kitchen, mug in hand, and paused when I heard Cassia's voice. It came sharp and bright, the way it always did when she spoke on speakerphone, never caring who overheard. "Yes, she's still here," Cassia said. A pause. Then laughter. I know. The whole house smells like mothballs and medicine. Her room stinks." The words landed like stones in my stomach. I stood frozen by the archway, the steam from the mug rising into my face, bitter and sweet at once. My daughter's voice, so casual, so dismissive, cut through me more cleanly than if she had shouted. "Jorge once told me that when I baked pan dulce, the scent filled the house with love." He had leaned across the table with sugar dusting his lips and whispered, "This smell is home." Now, to my own child, I was nothing but an odor to be masked. I turned back into the kitchen before she could see me setting the mug down with trembling hands. The coffee sloshed over the rim, leaving a dark stain on the counter. I wiped it quickly, ashamed of the mess, though no one was watching. Leora padded in moments later, hair damp from the shower backpack slung over one shoulder. "Morning, Grandma," she said, though. Her eyes were already on her phone. "Good morning, mi cielo," I answered softly. I pushed the second mug toward her, but she shook her head. "Mom says I shouldn't drink coffee. Too much caffeine?" I forced a smile. "Then maybe some toast." She hesitated, then sighed. "No time. Dad's driving me." She grabbed an apple from the bowl and kissed my cheek, quick and distracted. Then she was gone, leaving the mug cooling on the counter untouched. I leaned against the sink and let the silence wash over me. For months, I had told myself I was grateful that living here meant I was cared for. But Cassia's words lingered in my ears, sour and heavy. If she saw me only as a burden, what was I clinging to? I carried my coffee to the window and watched the morning unfold. Outside, the gardener trimming hedges, Thorne's black car waiting in the driveway, the world moving forward. Without me. I sipped slowly, the warmth steadying my hands. But inside, something shifted. A small, firm knot formed beneath my ribs. Anger, perhaps, or resolve. I thought of Jorge again, of the way he had looked at me when I pulled bread from the oven, as if I had conjured something holy. He would not have wanted me to wither here, reduced to whispers and insults behind half-closed doors. I set the mug down, the echo sharp against the marble. Cassia's words still cut deep, but the wound did not bleed helplessness. It bled something stronger. When words cut deeper than knives, what choice remains, silence or defiance? I carried the empty mug back to my room and set it on the dresser beside the lavender drawer. The sachets released their faint sweetness when I touched the knob, and for a moment I closed my eyes, letting the scent remind me of quieter years. But memory can be cruel. It does not stop at the tender parts. Cassia's words still echoed sharp as glass. "Her room stinks." I opened the drawer and almost without meaning to pulled out the crumpled photocopy of the deed again. My eyes followed my name printed there, and a thought surfaced, one I had never allowed before I had given too much, and in return, received less than nothing. The ledger began to write itself in my mind. I saw myself, at 39, standing in the kitchen of our farmhouse pen, trembling in hand, as Jorge and I signed the papers that mortgaged the land. We did it so Cassia could attend a private college she swore would change her future. "You won't regret it," she promised. And I hadn't, not then. The debt was ours, but the dream was hers. Later, when she came back from school with new clothes and new friends, I remember how she wrinkled her nose at the chipped linoleum floors. "It's so dated," she said. as if the home that had carried her was something to be ashamed of. The payment book on the counter had seemed to grow heavier each month, though I smiled and told her to chase her future. Another page in the ledger 10 years later. Cassia standing outside a sleek condominium building in Houston, eyes bright as she clutched the keys. She needed someone to co-sign. Her credit was thin, her income unsteady. Jorge and I agreed without hesitation. We celebrated that night with takeout pizza eaten on the floor boxes spread out like a feast. She moved out 2 years later, leaving the condo behind for something bigger and brighter, while Jorge and I shouldered the remainder of the responsibility until the property finally sold. The ledger thickened when Leora was born. Cassia's career was just taking off her hours long and unpredictable. I became the one who rocked the baby to sleep, who warmed bottles at 3 in the morning, who pressed cool cloths to feverish cheeks. Jorge teased me that I was starting the parenting journey all over again, and I didn't mind. Leora's small hand clutching mine was payment enough. But even those years blurred into dismissal. I remembered once at a holiday party how Cassia introduced me to her colleagues. "This is my mom. She helps with Leora sometimes." I had wanted to laugh to say sometimes, when my entire body still carried the weight of sleepless nights and hurried doctor's visits. But I only smiled and nodded, as if the truth had been too fragile to bear. Now, here in this grand house that gleamed with marble and glass, the ledger pressed heavy in my mind. Every sacrifice written in bold ink, mortgage co-signature, sleepless nights. Every repayment thin and fleeting, a distracted smile, a perfunctory thank you. A room in the back hallway that apparently smelled of mothballs. I folded the deed carefully and returned it to the drawer, my fingers lingering on the lavender sachet. Love had been my currency for so long that I had forgotten its cost. But the math no longer balanced. The lines refused to settle. As I smoothed the quilt across the bed, a clarity settled over me like a shadow at dusk. What happens when love is treated like a debt instead of a gift? That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the climate system and the faint click of ice settling in the bar's glass decanters downstairs. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the lavender sachet pressed against my palm, when the first gray light of dawn slipped through the blinds. I gave up on rest and reached again for the folded sheet in the drawer. The photocopy felt fragile, almost translucent. Jorge's handwriting scrawled across the margin of the last page, his neat, deliberate script. "Keep this safe. It may matter one day." I hadn't noticed that line before. My throat tightened as I traced the words, his voice rising in my memory, calm and steady even when the world shook. I read the document slowly, my eyes catching on legal terms. I barely understood joint tenancy right of survivorship encumbrances. Yet one thing became unmistakably clear. My name was not ornamental. I wasn't just an emergency contact or a sentimental nod to a mother's sacrifice. I was a legal co-owner. For years I had accepted the idea that this mansion was Cassia and Thorne's domain. My role was reduced to occupying a room near the laundry, tending a few tomato plants out of sight. But here, in black and white, was proof that my existence carried weight, paper weight, legal weight. The thought unsettled me. Relief mingled with guilt, then flared into something sharper, something I had not felt in a long time. Power. By mid-morning, I had pulled out my worn address book, the one Jorge used to tease me about for being hopelessly analog. My finger landed on a name written in fading ink, Rosa Devlin. We had sung together in the church choir for years before Jorge's illness pulled me away. I remembered her alto voice, strong and unwavering, and how she always lingered after rehearsals, offering rides to those who needed them. Rosa had gone on to become a real estate attorney. I dialed her number before fear could talk me out of it. "Mrs. Morales." Her voice was warm but professional, as though she answered unexpected calls every day. Rosa, it's Elowen. I hope I'm not intruding. Elowen, it's been too long. What can I do for you? My words tangled at first, but she listened patiently as I explained haltingly about the photocopy, about the house, about feeling invisible within walls that might in fact partly be mine. Do you still have the document with you? She asked. I do. I can bring it by. 2 hours later, I sat across from her in a small, sunlit office tucked between a dry cleaner and a tax service on Maple Avenue. Rosa spread the papers across her desk, adjusting her reading glasses. I watched her lips move silently as she read line after line, her pen tapping rhythmically against the legal pad. Finally, she leaned back. Elowen, this isn't just symbolic. You're a recorded co-owner. If your name is still on the deed at the county clerk's office, and from what I see here, it should be, you have full rights. You could even force a partition sale if you chose. That means the property would have to be sold, and the proceeds divided according to ownership shares. The words landed like thunder, both terrifying and electrifying. I pressed my hands together to keep them from shaking. So, Jorge, he left me a way out. Rosa nodded. It seems he wanted you to have security, even if things turned complicated. He must have anticipated more than he let on. I thought of Jorge's quiet foresight, the way he'd often said, "One day you'll need more than love to protect yourself." I had brushed it off as caution. Now I realized he had planted a safeguard like a seed hidden in the soil waiting for the right season to bloom. Relief flooded me, mingled with a hollow guilt. To even consider selling the house would mean dismantling Cassia's carefully constructed life, uprooting Leora's routines, unraveling the image my daughter presented to her polished world. Yet wasn't that image already tearing me apart? When I left Rosa's office, the photocopy tucked safely in my purse, the sky above Dallas had shifted to a brilliant blue. For the first time in months, I walked with my shoulders back. Jorge had left me one last card, and it was in my hand now. Would I dare to use it? The morning after meeting Rosa, I brewed coffee in the kitchen as sunlight streamed across the marble counters. The smell reminded me of mornings on the farm, simple grounding. But here, it seemed out of place, almost defiant against the sterile air of Cassia's curated home. Cassia entered heels already on, though it was barely 8, her silk blouse gleaming in the light. She tapped on her phone as if it were a second heartbeat, half glancing at me. "Oh, Mom, could you make it a little less strong next time?" Thorne says the smell clings to the drapes. I stirred my cup, steadying my voice. "Cassia, could we talk for a moment? Not about coffee. About us." Her eyes flicked up wary, then softened into that polite patience she reserved for interns and family. "Sure. But make it quick, I've got a call in 10 minutes. I nodded, though my words had been pressing for weeks. I want respect, Cassia. Not just a room in the back, not whispered complaints about the way I live. I've given a great deal for you for Leora. I don't ask for much, but I do ask to be treated as more than an afterthought." Cassia exhaled through her nose, setting the phone down as if humoring me. "Mom, no one thinks of you as an afterthought. Don't be dramatic." She opened a drawer, pulled out a fresh box of lavender-scented candles, and placed them on the counter with a flourish. "See, I picked these up yesterday. They'll help with that musty smell in your room. Problem solved." The words hit like a slap, not for their cruelty, but for their emptiness. Candles, her answer to years of sacrifice. Wax and perfume to mask what she didn't want to face. I sipped my coffee, careful not to let the cup tremble in my hands. "It isn't the air that needs clearing," I said quietly. She smiled, that thin corporate curve of lips. "Mom, you overthink things. We love having you here. But let's make it comfortable for everyone, okay? Now if you'll excuse me?" She kissed the air near my cheek and swept out heels clicking like punctuation marks on marble. I remained at the table staring into the dark pool of my cup. Years ago, in a farmhouse kitchen with peeling linoleum, I'd spilled coffee all over the morning paper. Jorge had laughed, wiping it up with a rag, saying, "Mess means we're living." That small chaos had felt human alive. Now the coffee sat smooth and unbroken, just like this house, polished, controlled, cold. I realized then that no amount of reason, no appeal to memory or love would move Cassia. She had built walls of glass and chrome around her life, and my voice could not penetrate them. The deed in my drawer was no longer just paper. It was action, waiting to be taken. A lever, Jorge had left me a truth stronger than candles and polite dismissals. I would not spill my coffee here. Not yet, but I would choose when and how to set it down, and I would make sure it mattered. What is stronger, confrontation or quiet planning? After Cassia's brush-off, I returned to my room and closed the door softly, as though sealing myself into a private sanctuary. The lavender sachets on the dresser released their fragrance when I pressed the drawer shut, and it was then I decided no more, waiting for kindness that would never arrive. If I was to reclaim any measure of control, it would begin with knowledge. I started a quiet inventory. Not the sort of list Cassia made on her sleek apps, but notes in my worn leather-bound journal, the same one where I used to jot menus for catering events. I walked the house slowly when no one was around, careful to leave everything just as I found it. The grand living room held antique clocks Jorge once admired when we visited estate sales. Thorne had insisted they completed the aesthetic, but I knew their worth wasn't just in their ticking. I noted them down. In the dining room, silver candlesticks engraved with my mother's initials gleamed from a sideboard. I had thought them lost years ago, yet here they stood, claimed now by Cassia's vision of elegance. Into the journal they went. Upstairs in the study, lined with books more for show than use, I found a locked drawer in Thorne's desk. It wasn't difficult to open. The key had been left carelessly in a porcelain dish, perhaps underestimating the curiosity of anyone who lived in his house. I hesitated, then reminded myself that I had more than sentiment at stake. Inside neatly stacked envelopes bore the seal of a regional bank. My pulse quickened as I read the words stamped in red past due. Final notice. The loan statements were addressed to Thorne, referencing large sums that staggered me. Lines of interest, accrued deadlines passed. Then one phrase made my breath catch. Secured by property. Oakwell residence. Oakwell. This mansion. I sank into the leather chair behind the desk papers, trembling in my hands. Thorne had mortgaged the house. My house. The safety net Jorge had left me. The deed with my name was already smoldering under the weight of debts I hadn't even known existed. I read further, piecing together the timeline. 2 years ago, around the time Thorne's new fund had launched with great fanfare, the loans had begun. He had borrowed heavily using the mansion as collateral betting on returns that clearly hadn't arrived. The notices grew sharper with each page, the bank's patience thinning. A strange cocktail of emotions surged through me, fear, anger, but also a fierce clarity. If the bank acted first, if foreclosure came, my co-ownership would be worth nothing more than a mention in a court filing. The home would be sold on someone else's terms, and I would be left with the scraps. I placed the papers back exactly as I had found them, locked the drawer, and returned the key. My hands shook as I closed my journal, but my mind had already leapt ahead. Rosa's words echoed. You could force a partition sale. My choice wasn't simply between enduring disrespect and leaving quietly. The clock was ticking and the fire was spreading. When I returned to my room, I drew the curtains tight and sat on the bed with my journal in my lap. The lavender sachet lay beside me, its scent both soothing and mocking. Jorge had given me protection. Yes, but protection only worked if I used it before others stripped it away. The house was a fortress of marble and glass, but its foundation was riddled with cracks. I was no longer just a guest here. I was a co-owner standing on ground that might vanish if I didn't act. If your safety net is burning, do you run or strike before the flames reach you? I didn't wait long before calling Rosa again. My hands shook as I told her what I'd discovered in Thorne's desk, and she suggested we meet right away. This time she asked me to come not only to her office, but to sit with a colleague of hers, a realtor she trusted with delicate matters. That afternoon, I found myself at a small conference table, sunlight falling in rectangles across the polished wood. Rosa sat across from me, calm as ever, her reading glasses balanced on the edge of her nose. Beside her was a man with quiet eyes and a careful manner. Allowin Rosa began. "This is Mr. Han Whitaker. He specializes in discreet property sales for clients who value privacy." Whitaker inclined his head. "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Morales. Rosa has told me you're facing a complicated situation." I slid the photocopy of the deed across the table, followed by the notes from my journal. I hadn't dared bring the bank statements, but I explained what I'd seen. Rosa listened without interrupting her pen, tapping softly, while Whitaker's expression remained unreadable. When I finished, Rosa folded her hands. "Your instincts were right. If Thorne defaults, the bank can move swiftly. Foreclosure doesn't care about family dynamics, and once it begins, your position weakens drastically. The deed gives you leverage now. Later, it might be nothing more than a footnote." Whitaker leaned forward slightly. "That leaves us with two paths. The first, cash out your share quietly. I can arrange a private buyer who will purchase your portion of the equity. You'd walk away with security, though not full value. It's quick, discreet, and final." I nodded, though my chest tightened. To leave quietly, was that freedom or surrender? "And the second path?" I asked. "Push for a partition sale," Rosa said. "Force the property to be sold in its entirety. The proceeds would be divided by ownership share. It's slower, riskier, and it will absolutely set Cassia and Thorne against you. But it could mean more protection, especially if the bank is circling." Whitaker's voice was low but urgent. "You only get one chance. If they discover what you know before you act, they can file to restructure ownership or bury you in legal motions until the bank takes over. Timing is everything." I stared down at the papers, Jorge's handwriting glinting faintly where the ink had pressed too hard. "Keep this safe. It may matter one day." He had known. He must have seen something in Thorne's restless ambition, in Cassia's obsession with appearances. He had left me this card to play when the air grew too thin to breathe. "What happens if I do nothing?" I asked, though I already knew. "Then you're left to hope Thorne pays his debts," Rosa said gently. But hope is not a strategy. Silence filled the room, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. I thought of Cassia's dismissive smile, of Leora's distracted kiss on my cheek, of the candles left on the counter, as if respect could be bought in wax. I thought of Jorge's laughter over spilled coffee and the farmhouse where dignity was woven into the walls. "I'll need time," I whispered. "Take it," Rosa said, though her eyes warned me that time was already slipping through my fingers. When I left the office, the late afternoon heat pressed heavy against my shoulders. The streets shimmered in the Texas sun, but beneath that brightness, I carried a darker weight, two choices, both dangerous, both inevitable. Which risk is heavier, betrayal discovered or freedom delayed? 2 days after meeting Rosa and Mr. Whitaker, I returned from a walk in the garden to find a narrow box sitting on the hall table outside my room. Cassia knelt on the floor, her hair tied neatly back, sliding a sleek white device into an outlet. A soft mist curled into the air, perfumed and artificial cloying with undertones of citrus and musk. Perfect, she said, straightening up. These are the latest model. They'll neutralize any lingering odors. I stopped mid-step. The hallway had always smelled faintly of lavender from my sachets of books stacked in my room of lived-in air. Now the perfume bit at my nose, sharp and foreign. Cassia brushed dust from her hands and turned her smile tight. Don't you love it, Mom? It'll keep things fresh. No more heaviness in the air. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The mist hissed gently from the diffuser, swallowing the lavender, erasing me. That evening, while I set the table, Leora wandered in from school, dropping her backpack on a chair. She wrinkled her nose, glancing toward the hallway. Mom says Grandma makes the house smell weird. The knife slipped in my hand, nearly slicing the apple I was cutting straight through to the board. I steadied myself and forced a smile. Oh, and what do you think, mi cielo? Leora shrugged already, pulling out her phone. I don't know. I guess it's true. The new diffusers smell better. She didn't mean to be cruel. Her tone was careless, distracted the echo of her mother's words rather than her own judgment. But the wound cut just the same. I excused myself under the pretense of fetching napkins. Upstairs in the solitude of my room, I pressed a pillow against my face and let the tears come. They spilled hot and fast years of quiet disappointments, rolling into one unstoppable wave. I wept for the girl who had once clung to my apron, for the woman who had outgrown my sacrifices, for the granddaughter who now repeated insults as casually as breathing. When the sobs slowed, I lay still, listening to the steady hiss of the diffuser outside my door. Each puff was a reminder in Cassia's eyes. I was not a mother, not a co-owner, not even a person. I was an odor to be scrubbed away. I rose, washed my face, and opened the lavender drawer. The sachets had lost much of their scent, but their presence anchored me. I placed Jorge's cufflinks in my palm, feeling their cool weight, his memory pressing close. He had prepared me for this moment, leaving me the deed as a shield. The rage that had boiled into tears hardened now into something sharper. I wrote in my journal, listing not just heirlooms, but insults, not just bank notices, but humiliations. Each entry steeled my resolve. That night, while Cassia laughed over wine with Thorn downstairs, I sat by the window, the papers hidden beneath my quilt. Beyond the glass, the city glowed with endless lights, indifferent to the battles inside this house. My hands no longer shook. The choice was clear. I could not live one more day waiting to be erased, waiting for the bank or for Cassia's disdain to decide my fate. The deed was not a relic, it was a weapon Jorge had placed in my care. And weapons unused rust into nothing. When dignity is sprayed away like an odor, what would you do to reclaim it? Cassia stood at the doorway, in a cream suit, her suitcase waiting by the car. Thorn tapped at his phone beside her, already speaking to someone about funding rounds and brand expansion. They were flying to Napa Valley for a retreat, 3 days of polished photos and curated panels. Mother, we'll be back by Sunday night, Cassia said briskly. There's plenty of food in the fridge. If you need anything, text the housekeeper. I nodded, keeping my face calm. Of course. Safe travels. She gave a perfunctory kiss to the air near my cheek before sweeping out her heels, clicking against the marble. Thorn followed without a glance. The front door closed with a heavy sound, and the house fell into silence, the mist from the hallway diffusers curling faintly, as though mocking me. I waited until the car had pulled away before I picked up the phone. Within hours, Rosa and Mr. Whitaker arrived. They came without fanfare, Rosa with her neat folder of documents, Whitaker with his leather briefcase and a steady, quiet gaze. Are you certain? Elowen Rosa asked gently as we sat in the study. I took the photocopy of the deed from my bag and laid it on the table, more certain than I've ever been. Whitaker opened his briefcase and drew out forms already prepared. The petition for partition sale, he explained. Once this is filed with the court, the process begins. The property will be ordered sold unless your co-owners can buy you out at fair market value. Given Thorne's debts, that's unlikely. I signed where Rosa indicated my hand, steady. Each stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The next step moved swiftly. Whitaker had arranged discreet movers, men who worked with precision and silence. They entered through the side door, careful not to disturb the pristine appearance of the house. They packed my belongings. First, the armoire that had belonged to my grandmother, the box of Jorge's tools, the recipe notebooks. The lavender drawer emptied into a small chest. I stood in the hallway as they carried pieces of my life past the humming diffusers. Each item that left the house felt like air returning to my lungs. By evening, the study was cleared of the mover's presence, the papers neatly filed and delivered to the courthouse. Whitaker closed his briefcase. The listing will go live tomorrow. I already have buyers interested. These properties do not sit long, especially when priced to move. Rosa placed her hand over mine. You've taken the hardest step. Now the process will run its course. Hold steady, Elowen. There will be anger when they return. Be ready. I nodded, though my heart thudded. Anger I could face. I had been living with disdain in silence. Fury might even feel like honesty. That night, I sat in the bare quiet of my room, the scent of lavender faint on my hands. Through the window, I could see the Dallas skyline glittering with promise. The mansion, with all its glass and chrome, was no longer a prison. It was a house under contract, its fate sealed by signatures and law. When the family returns, what will they find home or empty halls? The movers had left their trucks rumbling down the drive, until even the sound of the engines dissolved into the distance. For the first time since stepping foot in this mansion, I found myself truly alone. The silence stretched around me vast and hollow, as though the walls themselves were waiting for me to say farewell. I began upstairs in the guest room that had been called mine, but never felt like it. The lavender sachets were gone, packed in a chest, yet their faint perfume lingered in the drawer. I pulled it open one last time. Empty now, except for the smooth wood. I let my fingers trail across it, whispering a quiet thank you for holding my secrets, until I could gather the strength to use them. The hallway diffusers still hissed, filling the air with their sharp manufactured scent. I unplugged each one as I passed, slipping them into a basket by the door. Without them, the air grew softer, less suffocating. For the first time in months, I breathed freely. In the kitchen, I paused by the long marble counter. I remembered the way Leora had once perched on a stool here, swinging her legs, while I showed her how to slice apples thin enough for pie. Her small fingers had pressed sticky slices into my hand, her laughter ringing brighter than any chandelier overhead. That sound had faded in recent years, replaced by the hum of appliances and Cassia's clipped instructions. Still, the memory glowed faintly like a candle refusing to go out. I moved to the living room, where chrome fixtures gleamed under the recessed lights. Here was where I had carried trays during parties, invisible among glittering guests. I stood in the center of the rug, arms folded, and let the echo of their shallow laughter fade into silence. These rooms had never been mine, but I had inhabited them like a shadow, proof that shadows too leave traces. The dining room table stretched long and glossy, its surface untouched, except when Cassia entertained. I brushed my hand across it, recalling the battered oak table Jorge and I once sat, at passing cornbread and tamales, our elbows bumping as we laughed at spilled coffee. This table, though larger and grander, felt small in comparison, shrunken by its emptiness. At last, I climbed back upstairs and opened the drawer of my nightstand. From inside, I lifted the framed photo of Jorge taken on our 30th anniversary. His smile was steady, his arm wrapped around me as if he knew I would one day need reminding that I had once been cherished without condition. I pressed the frame to my chest and whispered, "You kept me safe, even now." For a long moment, I sat on the edge of the bed, the photo balanced in my lap, listening to the quiet heartbeat of the house. It pulsed with absence. No Cassia rushing down the stairs in heels, no Thorn boasting into his phone, no Leora's hurried footsteps. Just me, the walls, and the knowledge that this chapter was closing. When I finally rose, I carried Jorge's photo to the suitcase, waiting by the door. Outside, the late afternoon sun angled across the floor, painting everything in gold. I felt its warmth on my skin, and in that glow, farewell no longer seemed like loss. It seemed like the threshold to something waiting beyond. Can goodbye feel more like a beginning than an end? The call came as I was unpacking a small suitcase in the temporary apartment Rosa had arranged for me. The ringtone buzzed sharp and insistent against the countertop, and when I saw Cassia's name flashing on the screen, I braced myself. I answered, and her voice tore through the speaker, shrill and frantic. "You sold our house." I took a breath, steadying my tone. "Correction, our house, mine as much as yours." There was a pause just long enough for the words to register before she erupted again. "How dare you? Do you realize what you've done? This isn't some cottage you can barter away. This is our home, my brand, my life." Her fury hit like a storm, but I stood in the calm center. "You made it clear it was never my home. I simply chose to act before someone else like the bank did it for us." In the background, I heard Thorn's voice, muffled but urgent. "Ask about the buyers. Ask if she signed anything binding." His words overlapped with the echo of an airport intercom announcing boarding groups. I almost pitied them, then standing in some glossy terminal, their curated retreat dissolving before it began. Cassia hissed into the phone. "You've destroyed everything. Thorn has meetings lined up with investors. We had plans. Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" Before I could answer, Rosa, who had insisted on being present for this moment, leaned closer and spoke firmly into the receiver. "Mrs. Winthrop, the petition for partition sale has been filed with the court. The listing is active, and any attempt to block it without grounds will not succeed. You may want to consult your own counsel before threatening action." Cassia's breath came sharp, ragged. "You'll regret this, Mother. Do you hear me? You'll regret it." But beneath her fury, I heard something else, panic. Thorn's voice rose in the background, no longer muffled. "The creditors will see this, Cassia. If the house goes, we have nothing to leverage. Do you understand? Nothing." His words cracked with desperation, not the smooth confidence he wore at parties. For a moment, the line was filled with chaos. The shuffle of bags, the hiss of Cassia, snapping at him to be quiet, the dull roar of travelers moving past them. The masks they wore so carefully in public had slipped, and what lay beneath was raw fear. I let the silence stretch before I said quietly but firmly, "Jorge left me protection. You thought I was powerless. You were wrong." There was no response at first, only the muffled sound of Thorn cursing under his breath. Then Cassia's voice, smaller now, almost pleading, "Mother, please, think of Leora. Think of the family." I closed my eyes. For months I had thought of nothing else. I thought of Leora every morning when I brewed coffee she refused to drink, every evening when I passed her closed door. I thought of family when I swallowed their insults, when I smiled through their disdain. "I am thinking of family," I said. For once, I'm including myself in it. I ended the call before she could answer. My hand trembled as I set the phone down, but not from fear. From release. Rosa gave a small nod of approval. "They'll bluster, But the law is on your side. They cannot undo what's been filed. I sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over me. Through the window, the city lights flickered in the distance, steady and indifferent. For the first time, I saw them not as cold, but as promise. What happens when masks of power crack in public? 2 weeks later, the escrow closed. Rosa called me into her office, her voice steady as always, though her eyes softened when she handed me the envelope. Inside was the check, my share of the sale, neatly typed, my name spelled correctly in bold letters across the top. I stared at it longer than I should have. The numbers didn't make me rich by any stretch, but they were more than I had ever held in my name at one time. Enough for a modest home, enough for independence, enough to never again be beholden to candles or perfumed air meant to erase me. For a long moment, I thought of Cassia and Thorn. I pictured their faces at the airport, the cracks in their armor, the panic in their voices. They had treated me like a liability, but now it was their masks that were collapsing. My fingers trembled as I folded the check and slipped it into my purse. Power when real is quiet. That evening, I walked down the block of my temporary apartment complex and stopped at the mailbox row. Mrs. Alvarez, my neighbor, was there, struggling with envelopes in her frail hands. We had spoken a few times since I'd moved in. Her English was halting my Spanish rusty, but kindness filled the gaps. She lived alone, widowed like me, and she often pressed leftover tamales into my hands with shy generosity. Her face tightened as she pulled out a bill, the paper thick with official stamps. I recognized the crest of the local hospital. She clutched it against her chest, her shoulders sagging. "Everything all right?" I asked softly. She smiled faintly, but her eyes betrayed her. "They want money. Always money. My heart pills, they are expensive." She tried to laugh, but it sounded thin. "I think maybe I pay slowly." That night I couldn't sleep. I thought of the check in my purse, of the decades I had poured money into Cassia's ambitions, watching gratitude sour into contempt. I thought of how Jorge used to say, "Elwyn, give where it counts, not where it disappears." The next morning, I walked with Mrs. Alvarez to the hospital office. I asked the clerk for her account balance, and when the figure appeared on the screen, I slid my checkbook across the counter. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "All of it. All of it," I said. My voice did not shake. Mrs. Alvarez gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. No, I cannot let you." "You gave me tamales," I said gently. "This is the least I can do." Tears slid down her cheeks as the receipt printed long and curling like a ribbon. She hugged me tightly, her frail arms stronger than I expected. "You are my family now," she whispered. As we walked home together, I felt lighter. Not because I had spent money, but because I had chosen how to spend it. For the first time in years, I wasn't coerced into sacrifice, wasn't guilted into giving. I had acted freely, and the act itself restored something I hadn't realized I'd lost: dignity. Back in my apartment, I laid the receipt next to Jorge's photo on the nightstand. His smile in the frame seemed almost alive, as if he were saying, "Yes, Elwyn. This is what it was meant for." Is true wealth measured in money or in freedom to choose? The air smelled different in Galveston Saltier Freer, as though the sea itself kept the world honest. My rental cottage sat just a few blocks from the shoreline, a small clapboard house with peeling paint and a porch big enough for 2 chairs and a pot of geraniums. It wasn't grand, it wasn't marble, but it was mine. Each morning, I rose early and kneaded dough, letting the rhythm of my hands soothe me. Bread had always been my way of claiming space, filling the air with warmth no diffuser could erase. By afternoon, I tended the little herb garden I had planted in mismatched pots: basil, rosemary, cilantro. The scent clung to my fingers long after I washed them, a reminder that life could still grow in small, simple ways. One evening, as the bread cooled on the counter, The doorbell rang. The sound startled me. It was rare to have visitors here. When I opened the door, there stood Leora, backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes unsure. "Grandma," she said, almost a whisper. I pulled the screen open quickly, my throat tight. "Mi cielo, what are you doing here?" She held up a folder. "I have a school project. It's about family traditions. Mom said I should just write about our holiday parties, but I wanted to come here." I stepped aside and she walked in her gaze, taking in the cozy clutter of my cottage, the bread cooling the herbs on the windowsill, the photo of Jorge on the table. Her shoulders dropped, as if she had been holding herself too stiff for too long. We began in the kitchen, where I set out flour and sugar. "If we're going to talk about traditions," I said, "then we bake together. That's how my mother taught me and her mother before her." She smiled faintly and slipped off her backpack. We measured, stirred, and shaped dough into small rolls. At first, her hands were clumsy, dropping flour on the floor, but soon she found the rhythm, laughter spilling out when she pressed too hard and flattened a roll into a pancake. As the oven warmed, I told her stories of the farmhouse of Jorge, sneaking bites of filling, of the way the whole house smelled when bread baked slow and steady. She listened intently, eyes shining, scribbling notes into her folder. When the rolls were nearly done, she grew quiet, her gaze fixed on the countertop, her voice low. "Grandma, Mom told me not to get too close to you." I froze my hands, still dusted with flour. She said that Leora nodded, shame flickering in her eyes. "She said you make the house smell weird. That you're different, but I don't care. I like it here. I like you." The ache in my chest swelled so suddenly that tears blurred my vision. I reached across the counter and took her flour-streaked hand in mine. "Oh, mi cielo, I never wanted you to choose between us, but I'm glad you came. You belong to yourself, not to anyone's rules about who you can love." Her lips trembled, and then she stepped around the counter and wrapped her arms around me. I held her tightly, breathing in the scent of flour and salt air, feeling for the first time in years that family could still mean tenderness. When the timer rang, we pulled the rolls from the oven. She tore one open, steam curling into the air. "This," she said softly, "is what family tradition should taste like." I brushed a tear from her cheek, smiling through my own. The house smelled of bread, and for once, that was enough. Can love skip a generation when respect is missing in the middle? Cassia arrived on a Sunday afternoon unannounced. I heard her car before I saw her, the low purr of the engine, the hurried slam of a door. Through the kitchen window, I caught a glimpse of her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth of the path. She walked with her usual briskness, but there was tension in her shoulders, as if each step required more effort than she wanted to admit. When I opened the door, she was already on the porch, sunglasses shielding her eyes. "Mother," she said, her tone sharp but brittle. "We need to talk." I stepped aside, letting her in. She stood in the small living room, glancing around at the herb pots, the worn armchair, the scent of bread cooling on the counter. Her mouth tightened. "So this is where you've chosen to stay. It's home enough for me," I said gently. "Sit down, Cassia." She perched on the edge of the chair, arms crossed. "You blindsided us. Do you have any idea what people are saying, that we lost the mansion, that we can't manage our own affairs? My social circle is full of questions I can't answer without looking like a fool." I sat across from her, folding my hands. "I didn't blindside you. I protected myself the way your father wanted me to. He left my name on that deed for a reason. For decades, Cassia, I gave everything. I mortgaged the farm so you could go to college. I co-signed your condo when no one else would. I raised Leora when your work kept you away. And how was that repaid with candles to mask me? With words about how my presence embarrassed you?" Her jaw clenched, but her eyes darted away. "That's not fair. I've built something. People expect me to maintain a certain image. If they see weakness, I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. Weakness isn't needing help. Weakness is denying love when it's offered freely. For the first time, her composure cracked. She pulled off her sunglasses and her eyes looked damp tired. You don't understand. In my world, perception is everything. If I admit I leaned on you, if I admit the house wasn't only mine, they'll think I didn't earn it. You didn't earn it alone, I said softly. And pretending you did only leaves you emptier. Do you think those people will hold you when you fall sick? Do you think they'll sit by your bed the way I did for your father? Appearances don't love you, Cassia. People do. She pressed her lips together, blinking hard. For a moment, I saw not the polished executive, but the girl who once cried over failing a math test. The girl who whispered to me in the dark that she was scared she'd never be good enough. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she murmured. I didn't want anyone to see me as fragile. I reached across the table and laid my hand over hers. She didn't pull away. Fragile isn't the same as weak. You can be strong and still need. You can be successful and still accept love. That's what you've been missing. Her shoulders sagged as though the weight of years had finally pressed too heavy. She nodded once, a tiny motion, but it carried more honesty than all her clipped words before. We sat in silence, the smell of bread wrapping around us, the sound of the ocean, faint through the open window. For the first time in years, the distance between us felt bridgeable. Can a wound that deep ever truly heal? Not long after Cassia's visit, I found the cottage that would be mine. It stood on a quiet street near the water. Its clapboard siding sun-faded its shutters, in need of paint. Yet when I walked through the small front gate and caught the scent of jasmine climbing the fence, I felt Jorge's hand at my back, steady and certain. This was where I could breathe. The rooms were modest, 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, a porch that faced the sea, but they held a warmth the mansion never had. I unpacked, slowly filling the shelves with recipe books, arranging herbs on the windowsill, hanging Jorge's photo in the living room, where the light touched it each afternoon. Every piece I placed felt like stitching myself back together. One afternoon, after settling the last box, I stood in the entryway and studied the bare wall beside the door. It needed something simple, something that marked this house as mine. I drove into town and bought a small wooden hook, rounded at the end, plain but sturdy. Back home, I fixed it into the wall with a hammer and nail. Then from my pocket, I drew a single brass key, the spare. I hung it carefully, letting it dangle on the hook. Its metal caught the sunlight and gleamed softly. For anyone who knocks with respect, I whispered. It wasn't a lock against love. It was a boundary. I would no longer leave doors open for those who trampled through without thought. Whoever entered now would do so with care, not entitlement. That key was my promise to myself, love welcomed, dignity guarded. In the evenings, I sat on the porch and watched the jasmine sway in the breeze. Neighbors passed by with waves, and sometimes Mrs. Alvarez visited, carrying tamales wrapped in foil. Leora came on weekends, helping me water the herbs, her laughter filling the air like birdsong. Even Cassia appeared once quieter than before, carrying a bag of lemons from her tree. She didn't step inside that day, but she stood at the gate a long time, staring at the key. As the sun dipped low, I realized the door I had closed in Dallas had not been an ending at all. It was this beginning, fragrant with jasmine, steady with light. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and let the sound of the sea carry me forward. What happens when the door you close is also the one that opens a better life? Months passed and the cottage grew into a home stitched with new rhythms. The jasmine bloomed fuller at the gate, spilling fragrance onto the street. Each Sunday, I set the table on the porch with simple dishes bread still warm from the oven, tamales wrapped in corn husks, herbs cut fresh from the windowsill pots. It was never a grand spread, but it was enough to draw people close. On one such Sunday, the table filled with those who had walked beside me through storm and silence. Rosa arrived first, carrying a pie she insisted was store-bought, but baked with love. Mr. Hahn followed, setting down a bottle of wine with his usual quiet smile. Neighbors came with dishes balanced in their hands, laughter trailing behind them. And then, Leora, taller now, more certain in her steps, slid into the chair beside me and rested her head briefly against my shoulder before joining the chatter. The porch hummed with voices, the kind that layered instead of competed. For the first time in years, I felt surrounded by family, not measured by blood alone, but by the choice to gather to see one another. The surprise came earlier that afternoon. Cassia had arrived before the others, standing at the gate with a paper bag of onions and lemons. Her hair was pulled back, simply no cameras, no curated angles. She said nothing at first, only walked inside, set the bag on the counter, and pulled a knife from the drawer. I watched her slice onions, her movements awkward, unpracticed. For once, she wasn't orchestrating. She wasn't performing. She was just my daughter standing in my kitchen, eyes watering from the sharpness of the onion. Neither of us spoke much. The silence between us wasn't heavy, it was tentative, like a bridge newly built. Later, when everyone gathered at the table, Cassia sat quietly at the end, listening instead of leading. She laughed once softly when Leora retold the story of flattening dough into pancakes. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was something. A shift. As the sun lowered over the Gulf painting, the horizon gold, I looked around the table. Bread-broken stories shared respect, resting in the air like a long-awaited guest. My heart settled with the truth I had carried through. Every trial family is not the walls that hold you, nor the titles people claim. It is what remains when the false layers fall away. I thought back to Cassia's words in the mansion, the ones that had pierced me so deeply. Her room stinks. I had carried them like a wound until I understood. It wasn't my room that smelled. It was the air I had allowed myself to breathe, air thick with dismissal, with contempt. I had chosen to inhale it for too long. Now, in this little cottage with Jasmine at the gate and bread on the table, the air was my own. She said my room stank, I whispered to myself as I passed the bread basket. I learned it was the air I allowed. Now the house smells like bread. When respect finally knocks, will you open the door or guard it forever? Outline. Setting a sprawling suburban mansion in Dallas, Texas. Main character Elowen Morales, 68, retired caterer widow. Twist seed. While organizing her lavender sachets in the guest room, Elowen finds an old photocopy of a deed showing she co-owns part of the property from when she and her late husband invested in their daughter's first home. Introduce daughter Cassia. Image-conscious corporate executive son-in-law, Thorn venture capitalist with hidden debt. Tone bittersweet Elowen, grateful yet sensing distance. Hook question. If the house was partly hers, why did everyone behave as if she were only a guest cocktail party Cassia and Thorn host wealthy friends? Elowen floats unnoticed serving hors d'oeuvres. Description of the house, cold marble chrome glass walls contrasts with her warm old farmhouse memories. Subtle disrespect guests comment on eccentric relatives. Hook question. How long can someone live invisible in the middle of their own family's home? Morning routine. Elowen brews coffee, hoping to connect with granddaughter Leora, 13. Overhears Cassia on speakerphone telling her friend, her room stinks like mothballs and medicine. Emotional blow. Parallels with Horik, late husband, who once said her baking was the scent of home. Elowen hides the pain, but inside, something shifts. Hook question. When words cut deeper than knives, what choice remains? Silence or defiance? Flashbacks. Elowen recalls years of sacrifices mortgaging farm for Cassia's tuition, co-signing her condo babysitting Leora. Each memory reframed as a favor ledger, where her love was repaid with dismissal. Hook question. What happens when love is treated like a debt instead of a gift? Elowen reviews the deed more carefully. She legally retains rights. Contacts a discreet church acquaintance, Rosa Devlin, real estate attorney. Rosa confirms Elowen can force a partition sale, a hidden protection left by Jorge. Emotional reaction relief, plus guilt, plus spark of power. Hook question. Would she dare to use the last card her husband secretly left for her Act 2? Rising tension in plans. Breakfast scene. Elowen tries to ask Cassia for respect. Cassia brushes her off. Offers scented candles. Elowen realizes reasoning won't work. Only action will. Hook question. What is stronger, confrontation or quiet planning? Elowen secretly documents valuables, heirlooms, and papers. Discovers Thorne's hidden file, overdue loan notices. He used the mansion as collateral. New twist, if bank acts first, she loses everything. Hook question. If your safety net is burning, do you run or strike before the flames reach you? Meeting with Rosa and Mr. Han Whitaker. Discreet realtor. Options: cash out quietly or push for full sale. Mr. Han warns you only get one chance if they learn. First, they'll lock you out legally. Hook question. Which risk is heavier, betrayal discovered or freedom delayed? Cassia installs expensive scent diffusers outside Elowen's room. Leora repeats her mother's words. Grandma makes the house smell weird. Emotional climax. Elowen cries privately, but channels rage into decision. Hook question. When dignity is sprayed away like an odor, what would you do to reclaim it? Cassia and Thorne leave for a Napa Valley brand retreat. Elowen with Rosa and Mr. Han initiates the partition sale. Movers pack Elowen's things first. Legal papers filed. Mansion goes under contract. Hook question. When the family returns, what will they find, home or empty halls? Act 3. Fallout and confrontation. Elowen walks each room saying goodbye to spaces she never belonged to. She whispers to Jorge's photo, "You kept me safe, even now." Hook question. Can goodbye feel more like a beginning than an end? Cassia explodes. "You sold our house." Elowen calmly. Correction? Our house. Rosa counters threats with legal citations. Cassia's fury peaks. Thorne panics about creditors. Hook question. What happens when masks of power crack in public? Escrow closes. Elowen receives her share, enough for a modest future. Instead of luxury, she pays a hospital bill for neighbor Mrs. Alvarez. Symbol generosity by choice, not exploitation. Hook question. Is true wealth measured in money or in freedom to choose new setting seaside rental in Galveston, Texas? Elowen bakes plants. Herbs build small routines. Leora appears with a school project on family traditions. Tearful cooking scene, granddaughter confesses mother told her not to get close. Hook question. Can love skip a generation when respect is missing in the middle? Cassia visits brittle and defensive. Elowen lays out years of sacrifices, mortgages, tuition, babysitting. Cassia cracks, reveals her fear of appearing weak in her social circle. Elowen weakness isn't needing help. It's denying love. Hook question. Can a wound that deep ever truly heal? Act 4. Resolution and renewal. Elowen buys a cottage with Jasmine at the gate. She hangs one hook by the door with a spare key, for anyone who knocks with respect. Hook question. What happens when the door you close is also the one that opens a better life? Months later. Sunday table at Elowen's cottage. Neighbors Rosa, Han, and Leora join. Cassia arrives early, chopping onions quietly. No cameras, no brand deals. Closing reflection. She said, "My room stank. I learned it was the air I allowed. Now the house smells like bread. Final hook question. When respect finally knocks, will you open the door or guard it forever?